The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Marcus Thompson adjusted his designer sunglasses and stepped out of his black BMW. At 32, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never faced real adversity. His expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and gold watch spoke of a life built on his father's political connections rather than personal merit. As a civilian contractor for the Defense Department, Marcus had grown accustomed to walking through military facilities with an air of superiority that made seasoned soldiers clench their jaws. The base buzzed with typical morning activity. Soldiers moved with purpose, their boots creating a rhythmic pattern on the concrete pathways. Equipment hummed in the distance, and the occasional bark of drill sergeants echoed across the training grounds. Marcus had been here dozens of times, but he never bothered to learn the names of the personnel or understand the gravity of their work. To him, they were simply obstacles between himself and the lucrative contracts his company secured through his father's influence in Washington. As he approached the main administrative building, Marcus noticed a commotion near the security checkpoint. A small crowd had gathered, and voices were raised in what appeared to be a heated discussion. His curiosity piqued. He veered toward the disturbance, always eager for entertainment that might break up another monotonous day of meetings and paperwork. The scene that unfolded before him was exactly the type of situation Marcus lived for. At the center of the crowd stood a young woman in military fatigues, her uniform crisp and properly fitted despite showing signs of recent field work. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and intelligent brown eyes that held a steely determination. Her posture was perfectly straight, hands clasped behind her back, as she faced down a group of male soldiers who seemed to be questioning her authority. The woman's name tag read Rivera, and Marcus could see the lieutenant's bars on her collar. She was trying to explain something about new security protocols to the soldiers, but they were clearly not taking her seriously. Their body language screamed disrespect, with crossed arms, eye rolls, and barely concealed smirks. One particularly large sergeant kept interrupting her, his voice growing louder with each exchange. "Look, lady," the sergeant was saying, his tone dripping with condescension. "I've been doing this job since before you even thought about joining up. I don't need some fresh-faced officer telling me how to do my job, especially not some little girl who probably got her rank handed to her." Lieutenant Rivera's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady and professional. "Sergeant Martinez, these are direct orders from command. The new protocols are effective immediately, and I need your cooperation to implement them properly. This isn't about experience or gender. It's about following orders and maintaining security." The crowd around them grew larger, with more soldiers stopping to watch the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable with Martinez's obvious disrespect, while others seemed to enjoy the show. Marcus found himself grinning as he observed the scene, his mind already forming cutting remarks that would surely get a laugh from the boys. "Cooperation?" Martinez scoffed, stepping closer to Rivera in a clear attempt at intimidation. "You want my cooperation? How about you go back to whatever desk job you crawled out of and let the real soldiers handle security? This is men's work, sweetheart." The word sweetheart hung in the air like a slap, and Marcus saw Rivera's hands clench slightly behind her back. But still, she maintained her composure, her voice never rising above its professional tone. "Sergeant, I'm going to ask you one more time to comply with the new protocols. Your personal feelings about my gender or experience are irrelevant. These orders come from the top, and they'll be followed." This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. Unable to resist the opportunity to pile on and demonstrate his perceived superiority, he stepped forward from the crowd, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete. All eyes turned to him as he approached with the swagger of someone who believed his civilian status gave him immunity from military discipline. Well, Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying across the entire area. "Looks like we got ourselves a real tough guy here, boys." He gestured toward Rivera with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Or should I say tough girl? I hate to break it to you, honey, but this isn't some college campus where you can demand respect just because you put on a uniform." The crowd fell silent, the tension in the air becoming almost palpable. Rivera turned to face Marcus, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his civilian clothes and obvious arrogance. Martinez grinned widely, clearly pleased to have backup in his campaign of disrespect. Marcus continued, warming to his theme and enjoying the attention. "I mean, seriously, what are we doing here? This little girl thinks she can come in and start barking orders at real soldiers? Look at her. She probably weighs 100 pounds, soaking wet. What's she going to do if there's real trouble? Ask the bad guys to wait while she calls for backup. Some of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably, clearly not pleased with the direction the conversation had taken. But Marcus was just getting started, his confidence building as he fed off what he perceived as silent agreement from the crowd. "I've been coming to this base for 3 years," he announced, puffing out his chest. "I've seen real soldiers, real warriors who've earned their stripes in combat. And then we've got little Miss Dress up here trying to play soldier. It's honestly embarrassing. No wonder our military is going soft if this is the kind of leadership we're promoting these days." Rivera's face remained impassive, but Marcus caught a slight twitch in her left eye that told him his words were hitting their mark. Encouraged, he pressed on, his voice growing louder and more mocking with each word. "I bet she's never even been in a real fight, let alone a combat zone. Probably got her commission through some diversity program or because Daddy knew the right people. And now she wants to lecture actual warriors about security? That's rich. Really, really rich." The silence that followed Marcus's tirade was deafening. Even Martinez seemed to realize that the civilian had crossed a line that even he wouldn't dare approach. But Marcus was too caught up in his own performance to notice the change in atmosphere. He stood there grinning, hands on his hips, waiting for the applause he was certain would come. Rivera stepped forward slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the silent crowd. "Are you finished, mister?" she asked, her tone polite but with an edge that would have warned a more observant man. "Thompson," Marcus replied smugly. "Marcus Thompson. And yeah, I'm finished. Unless you want to hear more about how this whole situation is a joke." "Mr. Thompson," Rivera said, her voice still maddeningly calm, "I appreciate your perspective. But perhaps you should consider that there might be things about this situation that you don't understand." Marcus laughed loudly, the sound harsh and grating in the morning air. "Oh, I understand perfectly, sweetheart. I understand that political correctness has infected even our military. I understand that we're putting people in positions of authority based on what's between their legs rather than what's between their ears. And I understand that real soldiers are too polite to say what everyone's thinking." He gestured broadly at the crowd around them. "Come on, guys. We're all thinking the same thing, right? This is a joke. She's a joke. And anyone who takes orders from her is a joke too." The crowd remained silent, but Marcus misread their stillness as agreement. He turned back to Rivera with renewed confidence, preparing to deliver what he considered would be his killing blow. "You know what, honey? Why don't you run along and find something more suited to your talents? Maybe the kitchen needs help, or the laundry. Leave the real work to the real soldiers." As the last words left Marcus's mouth, he noticed something strange happening in the crowd. Soldiers were beginning to straighten up, their casual postures transforming into rigid attention stances. Eyes were focusing on something behind him, and the expression on Rivera's face was shifting from controlled anger to something that looked almost like anticipation. Marcus turned around slowly, his confidence beginning to waver as he saw what had captured everyone's attention. Approaching from the main building were 3 men in desert camouflage uniforms, their bearing unmistakably different from the regular soldiers around them. They moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, their eyes constantly scanning their environment, even in this supposedly safe setting. The trident pins on their uniforms caught the morning sunlight, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what he was looking at. Navy SEALs. The lead SEAL was a tall man with graying temples and scars that spoke of battles fought in places most people couldn't pronounce. His pale blue eyes swept over the crowd before settling on Rivera, and Marcus watched in growing confusion as the man's stern expression softened into what could only be described as genuine respect and affection. The 3 SEALs approached the group, their presence causing the crowd to part like the Red Sea. Marcus found himself pushed to the side as soldiers scrambled to make way for the newcomers. The lead SEAL walked directly to Rivera, stopping just in front of her before coming to attention and rendering a perfect salute. "Good morning, Major," he said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of a man who had shouted orders over gunfire and explosions. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was hell coming back from Coronado." Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. Major? Did the SEAL just call her Major? But that was impossible. He had seen her uniform, seen the lieutenant's bars. There had to be some mistake, some confusion. Are we saying that some people here know better than the Admiral? The second SEAL, a younger man with intelligent dark eyes and numerous commendations on his uniform, stepped forward slightly. Chief, maybe we should clarify something for the folks who might be confused about the chain of command here. Good idea, Petty Officer Williams, Kowalski replied, never taking his eyes off the crowd. Major Rivera, would you mind telling everyone about your recent assignment? I think there might be some misconceptions floating around. Rivera nodded, her posture straightening even further if that were possible. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the now silent crowd, each word dropping like a stone into still water. Certainly, Chief. For the past 18 months, I've been serving as the intelligence liaison for SEAL Team 7's operations in Afghanistan. Before that, I spent 2 years with Special Operations Command, coordinating between multiple Special Forces units throughout the Middle East. I returned to this base last week to implement new security protocols based on intelligence gathered during my deployment. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Intelligence liaison for SEAL Team 7? That wasn't some desk job or diversity hire position. That was one of the most demanding and dangerous assignments in the military, requiring security clearance levels he couldn't even imagine and the respect of some of the most elite warriors in the world. But Rivera wasn't finished. Her voice remained steady and professional as she continued. During my deployment, I participated in 47 combat operations, including the raid that resulted in the capture of Hakeem al-Rashid, the terrorist leader responsible for the bombing of the embassy in Kabul. A murmur ran through the crowd as soldiers recognized the name. The al-Rashid capture had been major news, though the details of the operation had been classified. Marcus remembered reading about it in the newspapers, but the articles had been vague about how one of the world's most wanted terrorists had been taken alive. The third SEAL, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. He was older than the others, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. What Major Rivera is too modest to mention, he said, is that she personally identified al-Rashid's location through a combination of human intelligence gathering and signals analysis that had stumped every other intelligence officer in theater. She then volunteered to participate in the extraction operation, during which she was wounded by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device. Marcus's mouth went dry. Wounded in combat? This woman he had just mocked as playing dress-up had been wounded in combat while hunting terrorists? Chief Kowalski took over the narrative, his voice filled with obvious pride. The major spent 3 days in enemy territory, posing as a local woman to gather the intelligence we needed. She spoke fluent Pashto and Arabic, understood the cultural nuances that had allowed al-Rashid to hide for so long, and put herself in constant danger to get us the information we needed to complete the mission. Rivera held up a hand, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Chief, that's enough. These soldiers don't need to hear my resume. They just need to understand that the new protocols are necessary and will be implemented immediately. But Kowalski wasn't finished. His pale eyes found Marcus in the crowd, and the civilian felt himself withering under the SEAL's stare. Actually, Major, I think some folks here do need to hear it, especially the ones who seem to think they know better than you do about military matters. He took a step toward Marcus, who found himself unable to move or speak. See, Major Rivera isn't just some officer who got promoted because of politics or gender. She earned her rank the hard way in the worst places on earth, doing jobs that would break most people. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the smart guy, the one who pointed out obvious problems that the military was too politically correct to address. Williams, the younger SEAL, continued the story. The Major also has a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown and speaks 5 languages fluently. She graduated first in her class from Officer Candidate School and holds expert marksman ratings with multiple weapon systems. Oh, and she has a black belt in Krav Maga, which she used to subdue 2 insurgents during a raid last year when her weapon jammed. Marcus felt like he was drowning. Every assumption he had made, every stereotype he had relied on, was crumbling around him. This wasn't some diversity hire or political appointment. This was a genuine warrior who had earned her place through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But the SEALs still weren't done. The older man, whose name tag read Morrison, stepped closer to the crowd, his eyes scanning each face with the intensity of someone who had spent years identifying threats. "You know what impressed us most about Major Rivera?" Morrison asked, his voice conversational, but somehow more threatening than if he had been shouting. "It wasn't just her intelligence or her combat skills or her education. It was her character. In 18 months of operations, I never once heard her complain about conditions, never saw her ask for special treatment, and never witnessed her backing down from a challenge." Morrison's eyes found Martinez, who was now standing at rigid attention despite not being directly addressed. "She slept in the same conditions as the rest of us, ate the same food, and faced the same dangers. And when things got tough, when operations went sideways and people started getting scared, she was always the calmest person in the room." Kowalski picked up the thread seamlessly. "The Major saved my life during a firefight in Kandahar. I was pinned down by sniper fire, bleeding from multiple wounds, and she crawled 50 meters through enemy fire to drag me to safety. She administered first aid under fire, called in the extraction, and then went back to complete the mission." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Each revelation made his earlier comments seem more ignorant, more cruel, and more inexcusable. He had called her weak, questioned her courage, suggested she belonged in a kitchen. And all the while, she had been a decorated combat veteran with more real-world experience than he would ever have. Rivera's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Gentlemen, while I appreciate your support, I think we've made our point." Mr. Thompson was simply expressing his opinion based on the information he had available. Now that he has more complete information, I'm sure he'll reconsider his position. Her words were professional and diplomatic, but Marcus could hear the steel underneath them. She was giving him a chance to back down gracefully, to apologize, and walk away with some small shred of dignity intact. But he was too shocked, too overwhelmed by the complete destruction of his worldview, to take advantage of her offer. The crowd began to slowly disperse, soldiers returning to their duties with new respect for their commanding officer, and obvious disdain for the civilian who had so spectacularly embarrassed himself. Martinez approached Rivera with obvious reluctance. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Major," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want to apologize for my earlier behavior. I had no idea about your background or your service record. It won't happen again, ma'am." Rivera nodded once, accepting the apology with grace. "Sergeant Martinez, we all make mistakes based on incomplete information. What matters is how we respond when we learn the truth. I trust you'll help implement the new protocols without further resistance." "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, ma'am," Martinez replied, his relief obvious as he realized he wasn't going to face more serious consequences for his disrespect. As Martinez hurried away, clearly eager to escape the situation, Marcus found himself alone with Rivera and the three SEALs. The weight of their combined attention was almost unbearable, and he struggled to find words that could somehow undo the damage he had inflicted. He began, then stopped, realizing that anything he said would only make things worse. Chief Kowalski stepped closer to Marcus, his voice dropping to a level that only the civilian could hear. "Let me give you some free advice, Mr. Thompson. In the future, you might want to learn about someone before you decide to tear them down. Because the next time you decide to mock a warrior like Major Rivera, you might not be dealing with someone as professional and forgiving as she is." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Marcus nodded quickly, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he tried to speak. Rivera turned to address the SEALs, her voice returning to its earlier professional tone. "Chief, I believe we have a briefing scheduled for 0800. Shall we move to the conference room?" "After you, Major," Kowalski replied, gesturing toward the building. As the four military personnel walked away, Marcus was left standing alone in the courtyard, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his confidence shattered like glass on concrete. The morning sun that had seemed so pleasant earlier now felt harsh and unforgiving, highlighting his isolation and humiliation for everyone to see. For the first time in his privileged life, Marcus Thompson was forced to confront the reality that his assumptions about strength, valor, and worthiness had been completely wrong. And as he walked slowly back to his BMW, he couldn't escape the feeling that this encounter had changed something fundamental about how he saw the world and his place in it. Marcus sat in his BMW for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The leather seats that usually provided comfort now felt suffocating, and The air conditioning couldn't seem to cool the flush of humiliation that had spread across his face and neck. Through the windshield, he could see soldiers going about their daily routines, and he wondered how many of them had witnessed his spectacular public embarrassment. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant reminding him about his 10 a.m. meeting with Colonel Peterson to discuss the latest contract renewal. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have strutted into that meeting with his usual confidence, secure in his belief that his father's political connections made him untouchable. But nothing felt normal anymore. The image of Major Rivera's composed face as he had mocked her kept playing in his mind like a broken record, each replay making him feel smaller and more ashamed. Finally, forcing himself to move, Marcus drove to the administrative building where his meeting was scheduled. The hallways that he had walked through dozens of times before seemed different now, charged with an energy he had never noticed. Soldiers moved with purpose and precision, their bearing speaking of discipline and dedication that he was only now beginning to understand. Every uniform he passed made him wonder about the person wearing it, what battles they might have fought, what sacrifices they had made. Colonel Peterson's office was located on the 3rd floor, and Marcus found himself taking the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the time to collect his thoughts. Each step seemed to echo in the stairwell, a rhythmic reminder of his earlier humiliation. By the time he reached the colonel's door, his heart was pounding not from exertion, but from a combination of embarrassment and growing dread about what the military personnel might have already heard about his behavior. Colonel Peterson was a career officer in his late 50s, with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in service to his country. He had always been professional in his dealings with Marcus, though the civilian had often sensed a cool distance in their interactions that he had attributed to military stuffiness rather than any personal failing on his part. "Mr. Thompson," the colonel said as Marcus entered the office, his tone neutral but somehow different from their previous meetings. "Please have a seat." Marcus settled into the chair across from Peterson's desk, trying to project his usual confidence, but feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the colonel's steady gaze. The office walls were decorated with commendations, photographs from various deployments, and unit insignia that spoke of a lifetime of dedicated service. For the first time, Marcus found himself actually reading the citations and wondering about the stories behind them. "I understand there was some excitement at the security checkpoint this morning," Peterson said without preamble, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Of course the colonel had already heard about it. News traveled fast on military bases, especially when it involved a civilian making a fool of himself in front of half the base personnel. "Colonel," Marcus began, but Peterson held up a hand to stop him. "Before you say anything, Mr. Thompson, I think you should know that Major Rivera is one of the most respected officers I've had the privilege to serve with. Her record speaks for itself, and the men and women under her command would follow her into hell if she asked them to." The colonel's words were measured and professional, but Marcus could hear the underlying steel in his voice. This wasn't just an official reprimand. This was personal. Peterson continued, "I've been in the military for 34 years, Mr. Thompson. I've served with thousands of officers, from second lieutenants, fresh out of the academy, to 4-star generals. Major Rivera ranks among the finest of them all, and that has nothing to do with politics or diversity quotas or any of the other nonsense that some people like to throw around. She's been wounded twice in the line of duty, has personally led operations that saved American lives, and has earned the respect of every Special Forces unit she's worked with. When the SEALs request her specifically for their operations, that tells you everything you need to know about her capabilities." The colonel leaned forward slightly, his gaze becoming even more intense. "So when I hear that a civilian contractor has publicly disrespected her based on nothing more than ignorance and prejudice, it doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me at all." Marcus knew he needed to respond, but his usual arsenal of smooth words and political maneuvering seemed useless in the face of Peterson's quiet fury. "Colonel, I made a mistake this morning. I spoke without having all the information, and I realize now that my comments were inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Thompson, you publicly humiliated a decorated war hero based on your assumptions about her gender. You questioned her competence in front of her subordinates and undermined her authority without knowing the first thing about her qualifications. Inappropriate doesn't begin to cover it." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear the tick of the clock on Peterson's wall, the distant sound of vehicles moving outside, and his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He had faced difficult situations before, had talked his way out of various scrapes using his father's influence and his own silver tongue, but this felt different. This felt like a reckoning. "What do you want me to do, Colonel?" Marcus asked finally, his voice smaller than he intended. Peterson sat back in his chair, studying Marcus with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat. "That's an interesting question, Mr. Thompson. What I want is for you to understand the magnitude of what you've done. This isn't just about hurting someone's feelings or making a social faux pas. You've damaged the morale and cohesion of a military unit through your ignorance and arrogance." The colonel stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base where hundreds of men and women were dedicating their lives to serving their country. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow more impactful. "Do you know what makes a military unit effective, Mr. Thompson? It's trust. Trust in your equipment, trust in your training, trust in your mission, and, most importantly, trust in your leadership. When you publicly undermined Major Rivera, you weren't just attacking her personally. You were attacking the fundamental bond that holds this whole organization together." Marcus felt a growing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, heavier than anything he had ever experienced. Throughout his life, his mistakes had been cushioned by his father's influence and his family's wealth. Consequences had been abstract things that happened to other people, not immediate realities that he had to face. The men and women who serve under Major Rivera trust her because she's earned that trust through her actions, her competence, and her character, Peterson continued. "Your little performance this morning was broadcast to dozens of soldiers who are now questioning whether their civilian leadership understands or respects what they do. That's not just unprofessional, Mr. Thompson. It's dangerous." The colonel returned to his desk and picked up a thick folder, placing it in front of Marcus. "I want you to read this. It's Major Rivera's service record, obviously with the classified portions redacted. I want you to understand exactly who you decided to mock this morning." Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands, and his eyes widened as he began to read. The documents painted a picture of a military career that was nothing short of extraordinary. Rivera had graduated summa cum laude from the United States Military Academy at West Point, finishing third in her class of nearly 1,000 cadets. She had earned a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, where she completed her master's degree in international relations while simultaneously studying Arabic and Pashto. Her military assignments read like a tour of the world's most dangerous places. She had served in Iraq during the surge, in Afghanistan throughout multiple deployments, and in various classified locations across Africa and Asia. The commendations and awards section took up 3 full pages, including a Bronze Star with V device for valor, a Purple Heart, and numerous other decorations that Marcus was only beginning to understand the significance of. But it was the personal testimonials from her commanding officers that really drove home the magnitude of his error. General after general praised her tactical intelligence, her leadership under fire, and her unwavering dedication to her soldiers. One colonel wrote, "Major Rivera possesses the rare combination of intellectual brilliance and moral courage that defines the very best of our officer corps. She is the kind of leader who makes everyone around her better, and I would trust her with my life without hesitation." Another testimonial came from a Medal of Honor recipient who had served with Rivera in Afghanistan. "In 30 years of military service, I have rarely encountered an officer with Major Rivera's combination of technical expertise, battlefield courage, and genuine concern for her soldiers. She represents everything that is best about the American military, and our nation is fortunate to have her service." Marcus read page after page, each document driving home the reality of what Rivera had accomplished and sacrificed. There were medical reports from her injuries, after-action reports from successful missions she had planned and led, and evaluations that consistently ranked her in the top 1% of officers at her level. One particular document caught his attention. It was a recommendation for promotion written by Admiral Henderson himself, the same man Chief Kowalski had mentioned earlier. The Admiral wrote, "Major Rivera's contributions to our counterterrorism efforts cannot be overstated. Her intelligence work has directly resulted in the capture or elimination of dozens of high-value targets, and her tactical innovations have been adopted across multiple Special Forces units. She is officer material of the highest caliber, and I recommend her for accelerated promotion and assignment to positions of greater responsibility. As Marcus read, Colonel Peterson continued his lecture, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who had spent years teaching important lessons to people who needed to learn them. Major Rivera could have had any assignment she wanted after her successes in special operations, Peterson said. She could have taken a prestigious Pentagon posting or a comfortable assignment at one of our stateside training facilities. Instead, she volunteered to come here to this base because she identified security vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed. She took on this assignment, knowing it would be thankless work, dealing with people who might not appreciate her expertise or respect her authority. Marcus looked up from the folder, his face pale as the full implications of Peterson's words sank in. You're saying she chose to come here? I'm saying she chose to come here because she cares more about the safety and security of American servicemen and women than she does about her own comfort or career advancement, Peterson replied. And instead of gratitude for her sacrifice, she gets publicly humiliated by some civilian who thinks he knows better than one of the most decorated officers in her generation. The colonel sat back down, his expression softening slightly as he saw the genuine distress on Marcus's face. Mr. Thompson, I've been dealing with civilian contractors for most of my career. Most of them are professional, respectful people who understand that they're guests on our installations. But there's always a few who seem to think that their contracts give them the right to disrespect our people and our mission. Marcus closed the folder carefully, his hands shaking slightly as the full weight of his actions began to settle on him. Colonel, I don't know what to say. I had no idea about any of this. I just saw a young woman giving orders, and I made assumptions based on prejudice, Peterson finished bluntly. Based on the assumption that a woman couldn't possibly have earned her position through merit. Based on the belief that your civilian status somehow gave you the authority to judge people whose boots you're not fit to polish. The harsh words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he forced himself to accept them without protest. Everything Peterson was saying was true, and denying it would only make things worse. What happens now? Marcus asked quietly. Do you want me to apologize to Major Rivera? Do you want me to leave the base? Peterson studied him for a long moment, as if weighing different options. What I want, Mr. Thompson, is for you to understand that actions have consequences. Your company has had a contract with this base for 3 years, and until this morning, that relationship has been professional and productive. But trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as he realized what Peterson was implying. The contracts his company held with the Defense Department were worth millions of dollars annually, and they formed the backbone of the business his father had spent decades building. If those contracts were terminated because of his behavior, it wouldn't just be his career that suffered. It would be the livelihoods of hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with his mistake. Colonel, Marcus said urgently, please don't let my stupidity affect our business relationship. Our company employs over 200 people, and many of them are veterans themselves. They don't deserve to suffer because of my poor judgment. Peterson's expression remained neutral, but Marcus thought he detected a slight softening around the edges. I appreciate your concern for your employees, Mr. Thompson. It shows that perhaps there's hope for you yet. But the fact remains that trust has been damaged, and that damage has real consequences. The colonel leaned forward again, his voice taking on a more serious tone. However, there might be a way to begin rebuilding that trust. Major Rivera will be conducting a series of briefings over the next month, explaining the new security protocols to various units across the base. These briefings are crucial for ensuring the safety of everyone who works here, and they require someone with her specific expertise and experience. Marcus nodded, not sure where Peterson was leading, but grateful that he seemed to be offering some kind of path forward. I think it would be valuable for you to attend these briefings, Peterson continued. All of them. I want you to see Major Rivera in action, to understand the depth of her knowledge and the respect she commands from the people who matter. I want you to learn what real leadership looks like. The suggestion wasn't really a suggestion, Marcus realized. It was a requirement, a condition for maintaining any hope of preserving the business relationship that his family depended on. Of course, Colonel, Marcus said quickly. I would be honored to attend Major Rivera's briefings. And I want you to know that I'm deeply ashamed of my behavior this morning. If there's anything I can do to make amends. Peterson held up a hand to stop him. Words are easy, Mr. Thompson. What matters now is how you choose to act going forward. Major Rivera is conducting her first briefing this afternoon at 1,400 hours in Conference Room B. I suggest you be there, and I suggest you pay very close attention. As Marcus left Peterson's office, his head spinning from the revelations of the past hour, he realized that his comfortable worldview had been completely shattered. The assumptions he had made about military hierarchy, about women in combat roles, about earning respect versus inheriting privilege, had all been proven devastatingly wrong. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond his own embarrassment. He had damaged relationships, undermined morale, and potentially jeopardized the livelihoods of people who trusted him to represent their company with professionalism and respect. As he walked back to his car, Marcus caught sight of Major Rivera in the distance, walking with purposeful strides toward another building. Even from 100 yards away, he could see the bearing of someone accustomed to command, the confident posture of a person who had earned every bit of authority she wielded. For the first time in his privileged life, Marcus Thompson was faced with the uncomfortable reality that respect couldn't be inherited or purchased. It had to be earned through sacrifice, dedication, and character. And as he prepared for the afternoon briefing, where he would begin to learn just how much he didn't know about any of those things, he wondered if it was too late to become the kind of person who actually deserved the opportunities he had been given. Marcus arrived at Conference Room B 15 minutes early, a level of punctuality that was unusual for someone who had spent years assuming that his time was more valuable than everyone else's. The room was already partially filled with officers and senior enlisted personnel, their conversations creating a low murmur of professional discussion. As Marcus took a seat in the back row, he noticed several people glancing in his direction, and he realized that word of his morning confrontation had spread throughout the base faster than he had imagined possible. The conference room itself was Spartan but functional, with rows of chairs facing a large screen and podium. Maps covered the walls, marked with various security zones and patrol routes that Marcus had never bothered to understand during his previous visits to the base. Now, looking at them with new eyes, he began to appreciate the complexity of the security arrangements that kept everyone safe while they went about their daily duties. Sergeant Martinez entered the room and took a seat several rows ahead of Marcus, his posture noticeably more respectful than it had been that morning. When their eyes met briefly, Martinez's expression was a mixture of embarrassment and grudging respect, as if he too was struggling to reconcile his preconceptions with the reality of Major Rivera's qualifications. At exactly 1,400 hours, Major Rivera entered the room, and the casual conversations immediately ceased. She was accompanied by Chief Kowalski and another SEAL that Marcus didn't recognize, their presence lending additional gravity to what Marcus had initially assumed would be a routine briefing. Rivera moved to the podium with the same controlled grace she had displayed during the morning's confrontation, her uniform crisp and her bearing unmistakably professional. "Good afternoon, everyone," Rivera began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room without seeming forced or artificially projected. "Thank you for taking time from your duties to attend this briefing. What we're going to discuss today could literally save your lives, so I ask for your complete attention." The room fell completely silent, and Marcus found himself leaning forward despite his efforts to remain inconspicuous. Rivera's opening had been simple and direct, but there was something in her tone that commanded immediate respect and attention. Rivera activated the projection screen behind her, and the first slide appeared showing a map of the base with various colored zones marked in detail. Over the past 6 months, our intelligence teams have identified several security vulnerabilities in our current protocols. These vulnerabilities have been exploited by hostile forces at other installations, resulting in casualties and compromised operations. She moved to the next slide, which showed photographs of damaged buildings and equipment from what appeared to be successful enemy attacks at other military facilities. Marcus felt his stomach clench as he realized that these weren't theoretical discussions or academic exercises. These were real threats that could affect everyone in the room. "The first vulnerability involves our perimeter monitoring systems," Rivera continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas on the map. "Current protocols require guards to physically patrol certain sections every 2 hours. However, analysis of enemy surveillance techniques shows that this predictable timing allows for precise planning of infiltration attempts. She clicked to another slide showing a detailed timeline with guard positions marked in red and potential enemy approach routes marked in yellow. The level of analysis was staggering, with every possible angle of attack carefully considered and documented. Intelligence gathered during operations in Afghanistan and Iraq has shown that hostile forces routinely spend weeks observing target facilities, documenting patrol patterns, shift changes, and behavioral routines. They're looking for windows of opportunity that our current protocols inadvertently provide. Chief Kowalski stepped forward to add his perspective. Major Rivera's analysis identified these vulnerabilities by thinking like the enemy. She spent months studying how successful attacks against military installations were planned and executed, then applied that knowledge to identify weaknesses in our own defenses. Marcus found himself genuinely fascinated by the presentation, despite his initial expectation that it would be dry and routine. Rivera's approach was methodical but engaging, combining hard data with real-world examples that made the importance of the new protocols immediately apparent. The second major vulnerability involves communication protocols during security incidents. Rivera continued, moving to a slide that showed a complex flowchart of command structures and reporting procedures. Current procedures require multiple levels of authorization before certain security measures can be implemented. While this ensures proper oversight, it also creates delay windows that can be exploited during fast-moving situations. She clicked to a video clip that appeared to be from a security camera, showing a real-time attack on a military facility. Marcus watched in horrified fascination as the attack unfolded, noting how quickly the situation deteriorated and how the defenders struggled to respond effectively within the constraints of their existing protocols. This footage is from an attack on a coalition base in Helmand province last year, Rivera explained, her voice remaining steady despite the disturbing nature of the content. The attackers breached the perimeter in less than 3 minutes, but it took nearly 8 minutes for the defenders to implement effective countermeasures due to communication delays and authorization requirements. The room was completely silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Marcus realized that he was witnessing the kind of life and death analysis that Rivera dealt with on a daily basis, and he felt a growing sense of shame about his earlier assumption that her work was somehow less demanding or important than traditional combat roles. Rivera paused the video and turned back to face the audience. The new protocols we're implementing address both of these vulnerabilities through randomized patrol patterns and streamlined authorization procedures. However, they require strict adherence and comprehensive understanding from every person involved in base security. She moved to the next section of her presentation, which detailed the specific changes that would be implemented. Marcus was struck by the thoroughness of her preparation and the obvious expertise that informed every recommendation. This wasn't theoretical academic work or bureaucratic box checking. This was practical, actionable intelligence that could prevent real casualties. Randomized patrol patterns will be generated using a computer algorithm that ensures complete unpredictability while maintaining necessary coverage of all security zones, Rivera explained, showing a complex diagram of overlapping patrol routes. Guard will receive their specific routes and timing only 30 minutes before their shifts begin, making it impossible for hostile surveillance to identify predictable patterns. An officer in the front row raised his hand. Major, how do we ensure adequate coverage of critical areas if the patterns are completely random? Rivera smiled slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the intelligence and competence that had earned her the respect of the SEALs. Excellent question, Captain Williams. The algorithm is weighted to ensure that high-priority areas receive appropriate attention, while still maintaining unpredictability. Additionally, the system includes fail-safes that prevent any area from going unchecked for more than 90 minutes. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed analysis of how the algorithm worked, complete with mathematical formulas and statistical projections. Marcus realized that he was looking at the kind of sophisticated analytical work that he had always assumed was beyond the capabilities of military personnel, revealing yet another layer of his own ignorance and prejudice. The streamlined authorization procedures involve pre-authorized response protocols for specific threat scenarios, Rivera continued. Rather than requiring real-time authorization for every security measure, Guard commanders will have pre-approved authority to implement specific responses to defined threat levels. Chief Kowalski stepped forward again to provide additional context. These protocols were developed based on after-action reports from over 200 security incidents worldwide. Major Rivera personally reviewed every report, identified common factors in successful and unsuccessful responses, and designed procedures that eliminate the most frequent causes of defensive failures. Marcus felt a growing sense of awe as he began to understand the scope of work that had gone into developing these protocols. This wasn't some theoretical exercise dreamed up by someone sitting safely behind a desk. This was practical, field-tested knowledge developed by someone who had personally experienced the life and death consequences of security failures. Rivera moved to a section of the presentation that dealt with specific threat scenarios, using detailed case studies to illustrate how the new protocols would be implemented. Each scenario was based on real attacks that had occurred at other installations, and she walked through how the improved procedures would have changed the outcomes. In this case study from a base in Iraq, attackers used a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device as a diversion, while a secondary team attempted to breach the perimeter at a different location. Rivera explained, showing satellite imagery and timeline data. The defenders successfully stopped the secondary attack, but not before the attackers had penetrated far enough to damage critical infrastructure and injure several personnel. She clicked to the next slide, which showed how the new protocols would have addressed the same situation. Under our improved procedures, the randomized patrol patterns would have increased the probability of early detection by 37%. Additionally, the streamlined authorization procedures would have allowed for immediate implementation of lockdown protocols, reducing the attacker's window of opportunity by an estimated 4 to 6 minutes. An enlisted man near the middle of the room raised his hand. "Major, what kind of training will be required for personnel to implement these new protocols effectively?" "Another excellent question, Sergeant," Rivera replied. "Implementation will require a comprehensive training program that we'll be conducting over the next 3 weeks. Every person involved in base security will receive both classroom instruction and practical exercises designed to ensure complete familiarity with the new procedures." She moved to a slide showing the training schedule, which was color-coded by unit and level of responsibility. Marcus was impressed by the level of detail and organization that had gone into planning the implementation, recognizing the kind of project management skills that were essential for any complex organizational change. Training will be conducted in small groups to ensure personalized attention and hands-on practice, Rivera continued. "We'll be using realistic scenario-based exercises that simulate the actual conditions under which these protocols might need to be implemented." As the briefing continued, Marcus found himself completely absorbed in the material. Rivera's presentation was masterful, combining technical expertise with clear communication and obvious practical experience. Every question from the audience was answered with the confidence of someone who had thought through every possible angle and scenario. But beyond the professional competence of the presentation, Marcus was beginning to understand something deeper about the woman he had so carelessly mocked that morning. Rivera wasn't just implementing new security protocols because she had been ordered to do so. She was implementing them because she genuinely cared about the safety and welfare of every person on the base. When she discussed potential casualties that could be prevented by the new procedures, her voice carried a weight that spoke of personal experience with loss. When she talked about the importance of training and preparation, her intensity reflected someone who understood that mistakes in her field were measured in human lives rather than dollars or deadlines. The briefing concluded with a detailed question and answer session that lasted nearly an hour. Rivera answered every question with patience and thoroughness, never seeming annoyed by requests for clarification or challenges to her reasoning. Marcus watched as even the most skeptical members of the audience gradually came around, their body language shifting from resistance to acceptance and, finally, to genuine respect. As the meeting ended and personnel began to file out of the room, Marcus remained seated, overwhelmed by everything he had witnessed. The woman he had dismissed as unqualified that morning had just delivered one of the most impressive professional presentations he had ever seen, demonstrating levels of expertise and competence that put his own civilian accomplishments to shame. Sergeant Martinez approached Rivera as she was packing up her materials. "Major, I wanted to thank you for the briefing. I have to admit, I had some doubts about the new protocols this morning, but after seeing your analysis, I'm completely convinced. This is going to make all of us safer." Rivera nodded graciously. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate your willingness to keep an open mind." If you have any questions as we begin implementation, please don't hesitate to ask. As Martinez left, Marcus found himself alone in the conference room with Rivera and Chief Kowalski. He knew he needed to say something, but the words that had come so easily that morning now seemed completely inadequate. Rivera looked at him directly for the first time since the briefing began. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you found the presentation informative." Her tone was professional, but neutral, neither hostile nor particularly welcoming. Marcus realized that she was giving him an opportunity to respond appropriately, but that the choice was entirely his. "Major," Marcus began, his voice quieter than usual, "I owe you an apology. Not just for this morning, but for everything I didn't understand about what you do and who you are." Rivera studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson, everyone makes mistakes based on incomplete information. The question is whether we're willing to learn from those mistakes and adjust our perspectives accordingly." Her response was gracious, but Marcus could hear the careful professionalism in it. She was willing to accept his apology, but she wasn't going to pretend that his earlier behavior hadn't revealed something fundamental about his character and assumptions. Chief Kowalski stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, Major Rivera is too polite to say this, but I'm not. What you did this morning wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate and undermine someone based on nothing more than your own prejudices. The fact that you were completely wrong about her qualifications makes it worse, not better." Marcus felt his face burning with shame, but he forced himself to meet Kowalski's steady gaze. "Chief, you're absolutely right. I have no excuse for my behavior. I let my assumptions and biases cloud my judgment, and I acted in a way that was completely unacceptable." Rivera held up a hand to stop Kowalski from responding. "Chief, I appreciate your support, but Mr. Thompson has apologized, and I accept that apology. What matters now is how we move forward." She turned back to Marcus, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I understand that today has been educational for you. I hope you'll take this opportunity to examine some of your assumptions, not just about military personnel, but about how you evaluate people in general." Marcus nodded earnestly. "Major, I promise you that I will. Today has been the most humbling experience of my life, and I'm beginning to understand that I have a lot to learn about respect, about competence, and about what real service looks like." As Rivera and Kowalski left the conference room, Marcus remained seated for several more minutes, processing everything he had experienced. The comfortable certainties of his worldview had been completely demolished, replaced by a growing awareness of how much he didn't know about courage, dedication, and genuine accomplishment. For the first time in his life, Marcus Thompson was forced to confront the possibility that he had been living as a fraud, coasting on inherited privilege, while looking down on people who had earned their positions through sacrifice and merit. And as he finally gathered his things and prepared to leave, he wondered whether it was possible for someone like him to change, or whether the patterns of a lifetime were too deeply ingrained to overcome. 3 months after his humiliating encounter with Major Rivera, Marcus Thompson sat in his father's sprawling Washington, D.C. office, surrounded by the trappings of political power that had once filled him with pride, but now seemed somehow hollow. Senator David Thompson looked up from a stack of legislative documents, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion as he studied his son's unusually serious demeanor. "Marcus, you've been different lately," the senator said, setting down his papers. "Your mother's worried, and, frankly, so am I. The last few times we've talked, you've seemed, I don't know, distracted, troubled." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair that had been custom-made to match his father's imposing desk. For 32 years, this office had represented security and unlimited opportunity to him. His father's influence had opened every door, smoothed every path, and eliminated every obstacle that might have forced Marcus to prove his own worth. But now, surrounded by the photographs of his father with presidents and foreign dignitaries, Marcus felt like a fraud. "Dad," Marcus began carefully, "I need to ask you about something. About the contracts our company has with the Defense Department. How much of that business comes from your political relationships versus the actual quality of our work?" Senator Thompson raised an eyebrow at the unexpected question. "That's an interesting question, son. Why do you ask?" Marcus had been dreading this conversation for weeks, but his experiences at the military base had made it unavoidable. "I've been spending time at one of our contract sites, actually paying attention to the work being done there. I'm beginning to realize that there are levels of competence and dedication in the military that I never understood or appreciated. It's making me question whether our company actually deserves the contracts we hold. The senator leaned back in his chair, studying his son with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading people's motivations and intentions. Marcus, you're talking about business relationships that have taken years to build. Our company provides valuable services to the military, and we do it efficiently and cost-effectively. That's why we continue to win contracts. But do we win them because we're the best option, or because you know the right people? Marcus pressed, his voice gaining intensity despite his efforts to remain respectful. Because I've met people recently who have earned their positions through blood, sweat, and genuine sacrifice. And when I compare their accomplishments to my own, I come up embarrassingly short. Senator Thompson's expression grew more serious as he began to understand the direction of the conversation. Son, you're talking about throwing away everything I've built. Our business relationships, our political capital, your future prospects. Why would you want to do that? Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Capitol building where his father had spent decades accumulating the influence that had shaped Marcus's entire life. Dad, 3 months ago, I publicly humiliated myself by making ignorant assumptions about a military officer's qualifications. Not just any officer, but someone who had risked her life repeatedly in combat, who had saved American lives, who had earned the respect of some of the most elite warriors in the world. He turned back to face his father, his expression filled with a pain that the senator had never seen before. I called her incompetent based on nothing but her gender and my own prejudices. I questioned her authority in front of her subordinates. I suggested she belonged in a kitchen rather than in a leadership position. And all the while, she was someone who had sacrificed more for her country than I could ever imagine. Senator Thompson remained silent, recognizing that his son was working through something fundamental rather than simply having a momentary crisis of confidence. The worst part, Marcus continued, is that my behavior wasn't an accident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was the natural result of a lifetime of believing that I was superior to people who had actually earned their positions. I've been coasting on your influence and our family's wealth while looking down on people who have dedicated their lives to serving others. Marcus returned to his chair, his posture reflecting the weight of everything he had learned about himself. Dad, I need to know the truth about our business. How much of our success is based on merit, and how much is based on political favoritism? Because if it's the latter, then I've been living a lie for my entire adult life. Senator Thompson was quiet for a long moment, processing his son's words and the obvious pain behind them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of resignation that Marcus had never heard before. Marcus, you're right that our political relationships have opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. In the world of government contracting, those relationships are crucial for getting opportunities to compete. But that doesn't mean our company hasn't performed well once we've gotten those opportunities. The senator stood and joined his son at the window, both men looking out at the seat of American power that had shaped both their lives in different ways. However, Senator Thompson continued, I think you're asking the wrong question. The real question isn't whether we've benefited from political influence. The question is what we do with those advantages. Do we use them responsibly, or do we abuse them? Marcus turned to study his father's profile, searching for signs of the moral certainty that had once seemed to characterize everything about the senator's worldview. Dad, I met someone who started with nothing and built a career based purely on merit, sacrifice, and dedication to something larger than herself. When I compare my life to hers, I realize that I've never actually been tested. I've never had to prove myself without the safety net of our family's influence. I've never had to earn respect through my actions rather than my connections. Senator Thompson nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. You're talking about Major Rivera. Marcus started in surprise. You know about her? Son, I know about everything that might affect our business relationships. When a civilian contractor publicly disrespects a decorated war hero, that information tends to reach interested parties fairly quickly. The senator's admission sent a chill through Marcus as he realized that his behavior had been noted at the highest levels of government. Dad, what kind of consequences are we looking at? That depends entirely on how we handle the situation going forward, Senator Thompson replied. Major Rivera could have filed formal complaints that would have ended our contracts immediately. The fact that she chose not to suggest that she believes in redemption and second chances. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude mix.